Hello YouTube! So another TFT set, which means there are a bunch of new champs that kind of have hidden strength that you may not know unless you're a sweat like me. So maybe you don't want to go through every champ and read everything. Who plays TFT to read? Just leave this on while you're driving or falling asleep, and we'll talk about some of the stuff. Now obviously some of these champs on this current patch aren't that great, but I think these are good things to know regardless, because champs get buffed over time. Or sometimes you'll find yourself using a not great champ just to hold items because you 2-starred it for free, and it's nice to know the kind of nuance to some of their spells. Okay, so Cho'Gath's spell applies burn and wound. You might have not known that, so if you find Cho'Gath early or you're just using him early, you don't have to slam Sunfire Cape. In fact, your Sunfire Cape will not do much, and you can try to position Cho'Gath in front of other champions that may heal a lot, like Kobo and Aatrox. They both heal quite a bit early game, and you can kind of cuck them with Cho'Gath there. Jax gains a lot of armor and MR when he ults. It's kind of obvious, but in general, if you have health items and you find a Jax 2, he'll just be a very good early tank for you. Because he has so much armor and MR, just giving him more health is way more useful than giving him more armor and MR like gargoyles. You know, the way defensive stat works is like you kind of want all of them in combination, while stacking just one of them is not great. So if you do find, you know, an early redemption or something, I don't know, and you feel like slamming it because you have no use for the tier, you find a Jax 2, he's actually a very good tank because of how much armor and MR he gets at such early game. Obviously you're going to have to sell him later. Okay, so Kog'Maw gains range with every 2 casts he does. He is a sniper, so that just means that the more range he's hitting someone from, the more damage he's going to do to them. So this is a completely made up like scenario, but let's say you are using Kog'Maw to hold some items. This actually is nice to play around. Sometimes you want to play on the furthest side from the enemy range carry, if you're trying to, like, you know, sweat your win streak. Because let's say Kog'Maw stacks up his range, Nico ends up dying, Kobo ends up dying, and it's just these two, which this kind of happens a lot. Or maybe there's a second champ here, like a Sivir beside, whatever. Kog'Maw will not have to walk up to hit them, which just means he's going to do way more damage to them, and they're going to spend a lot more time walking up to here. So you might win a fight based off this. Just in general, you may want to position Kog'Maw away from frontline. So if you notice someone has their tanks in the corner like this, you may want to put Kog'Maw here. Obviously you're going to want to do that anyway because he's a sniper, but it pays off because as he kills this Kobuko, he doesn't have to walk up for this one. He won't have to walk up for this one if he's ulted a few times. So if you're using Kog'Maw as an item holder or just carrying him in general, keep that in mind. So Kobuko gains permanent stacking health for every point of interest you earned at the end of that turn. This is kind of counterintuitive because it makes it seem like he's a good champ to keep late game because he's going to stack a bunch of health. But if you're going to reroll a 1 cost, you're never going to have a lot of interest early because you're pretty much spending it very early into the game, right? At like 3-1, you might be already going below 50 interest. So it's a little awkward, but keep it in mind. Also, he heals a lot early game, so watch out for Cho'Gath and Sunfire Capes if you're using him on your front line. Try to position him away from that. Darius's damage comes a lot from the basic attacks after. So he'll swing, and then his next 4 attacks will deal a bunch of damage. That's why Duelist, like, you're going to want Duelist in if you're playing Darius, obviously. And if you just want him to hold attack speed items, that's not bad because a lot of his damage does come from that. You don't just need the Decimate swing itself to do a lot. So yeah, he's actually a good item holder for some attack speed. If you might sell him like pretty quick, you know, maybe, but you have a Nashers and you want to play something, it's not terrible to throw it on him. Rek'Sai, very similar to Jax, but a bit less, gains a lot of armor MR if you have health items. Very good tank for you in the early game. Sivir boosts the attack speed of all adjacent allies. Now this means that they don't actually have to be on the same row as Sivir, right? So maybe you will see, so Kayle also gives attack speed only on the same row. So let's say you want your Teemo gaining attack speed from Sivir and Kayle. You can do something like this. Let's pretend Rakan's Kayle here. Kayle will give these guys attack speed. Sivir will give these guys attack speed. So yeah, they don't actually have to be on the same row. They just have to be touching hexes when she casts. So I mean, you can do this. I feel like you probably still end up doing something like this more often anyway. Okay, Aatrox's ability actually shreds 20% MR. That's good. So if you have an Aatrox on the field and you have an AP carry, even if they're just holding items for you, let's say you have a Lux, you want to make sure Lux is targeting the same champ that Aatrox is. So maybe have them like this. So they'll target this or this together, or on the outside, whatever. That's because Aatrox will, I mean, Lux is a terrible example because she might not actually throw it at this target, but you get what I mean. Gnar gains 2% AD every time he hits or gets hit, so he's better in longer fights. He's good with healing because you want him to stay healthy after he's getting hit and gets all this damage buff. Something to keep in mind. I feel like kind of obvious. So Lux's ability only stuns the first 2 targets it hits, and she also loses 30% damage every time it hits another unit. So what this pretty much means is what I'm trying to get at here is that you might not always actually want Lux to hit as many units as possible, right? Let's say you have something like this. I'm just making up backlines here. And you really want to hit this Senna with Luxol, right? There's a situation like this. She'll always target the furthest enemy, right? So even if you had Lux here, Senna would still be the furthest enemy and she would take much more damage and she would get stunned. So let's say your goal is to kill Lux, Senna specifically, because maybe you have some other backline access like trick shot or something. I don't know. If your goal is to only hit Senna or to only stun the backline because you want to slow down their damage, putting her here is actually worse because only these 2 units will get stunned, and by the time the ball gets to Senna, it's going to be greatly reduced damage and the stun's gone. So it is worth thinking about. Maybe you want to put her here because Senna will still be the target because she's the furthest. You might only hit her, or you may hit Kobo plus her, which will stun her and do a lot of damage to her because it's only 1 decrease. Something to keep in mind. It's a small little optimization. Senna grants AD to allies to the left and right of her. So unlike Sever, she actually has to be touching them on the same row. She cannot be here. She won't give it to anyone. This makes Senna a pretty good just splash unit if you want 1+1 sniper, right? Maybe you're playing Ashe and you don't have like your exact comp build out yet. You might just want to play Senna as your secondary sniper because she's going to give your Ashe AD. Now, if you have like a faded frontline, maybe you want Aphelios to get faded. Or you have some ghostly units, maybe you want Caitlyn for ghosted, of course. But in general, if you don't have something you specifically need, Senna is a good kind of splash sniper just to give Ashe more AD. Teemo's ability does damage over 8 seconds, okay? So long fights are better for him. So make sure your frontline is good. Now, Teemo reroll is gaining popularity, or it's already popular, I guess. And sometimes I will see people do this. So on their level 8, they hit level 6, and on the roll down they find Kai'Sa, which means you can play 4 sharpshooter. That's great. And then they end up playing their frontline, which is like Riven and Garen maybe for Story Weaver, or they'll just play Riven plus Aatrox, whatever. This is pretty bad because you want long fights as Teemo. You're going to be stuck at level 6 for a while because you're rerolling him. And just in general, so just drop these 2, who cares, and add, you know, your Aatrox for Bruiser and your Jax for Warden, whatever. You still get to keep your Kayle in this situation, and even though you have less damage overall because you don't have your 4 trick shot, you only have 2, because the fight is lasting so much longer, Teemo's ability is actually applying on everyone. You'll save way more health this way. I've seen people play 4 trick shot when they're rerolling at 6, and I feel like that's kind of troll, especially if you're rerolling for Teemo specifically because he likes longer fights. Okay, so Shen's next 2 attacks after he ults do bonus true damage, which is cool. Maybe you knew that already, but maybe what you didn't know is that it actually scales with armor, as you can see right here. So the more armor he has, the more true damage he's going to do with his ability, and it actually adds up if you have, you know, a Bramble on him, which isn't a common slam these days because it's a lot of AP comps being played, but in the future maybe a lot of AD comps get buffed. You find a Shen too early. Behemoth already gives him armor. Maybe you're going to want to slam a Bramble Vest because, you know, everyone's playing Ashe or something in a future patch. He will be a very good 2 cost for you to play because he actually does do a lot of damage if you give him some armor. That's pretty cool. Zyra's ability, Wounds. So try to hit units that heal a lot, is similar to Cho'Gath, but hers does not burn. So a lot of people have the idea that these are the same thing, Wound and Burn. Wound is just you heal for less. Burn is you take 1% damage every second or something like that. Sunfire, Cape and Morello apply both, but not every champion applies both. Some apply both, some apply one. So Alun's ability shreds magic resist, but it's only by 20%. The reason I say only is because Static Shift and Ionic Spark are 30%. Now, if you don't have any of these items and you're just using Alun as shred, that's still fine. Like, but in the late game, that 10% might actually make a difference. So even if you're playing a Alun carry, obviously you don't have to greed for a Shiv. I mean, I wouldn't, and you obviously don't have to greed for a Spark. But if you have the option and like there's not a clearly better alternative, that 10% might matter because in the super late game, if you're playing a Alun 3, when people get, you know, 200 MR, that 10% actually does make quite a big difference. But in general, you don't have to like worry about slamming those items. If you're playing around Alun or just using her as like a secondary carry, item holder, whatever, because she will shred the magic resist herself. Now, Amumu heals a lot, so watch out for stuff like Cho'Gath, like we already talked about, Zyra, Sunfire, Capes. He also heals allies around him, so even if he's not holding your item, if you have another champion who is, like someone's holding a Gargoyle Stoneplate, you might want to put him right beside Amumu, so Amumu heals that champion up, and you just get way more value out of his ult. Okay, Saraka. So every time your team loses 20% of their total health, she gains 8 AP. This means she's much better towards the ends of fights. Also, theoretically, if your team's healing a lot, I think this can just keep stacking. But also another big deal is she mana reaves the largest group by targeting the center. So if you're worried about that, you have a lot of tanks with high mana costs, or even just like someone who's on the second line, like Lysandra. Make sure she's not in like that big clump. Maybe spread out your front line a bit, so not too many people get mana reaved, because you know that can make the difference of a fight. When you're fighting against Saraka, keep that in mind. Aphelios Sunder's 20% armor, exact same thing with the Loon, that Last Whisper and Even Shroud are better. So maybe even if you're playing Aphelios reroll, you might still want a Last Whisper or an Even Shroud. You don't have to. Again, it's one of those things where it's weird. It's like, because he has this ability, it doesn't feel bad to skip items like Last Whisper, but it also doesn't feel bad to build it still, in my opinion, because 10% does matter in like the super late game fights, but it becomes less of a priority, right? Okay, so Thresh not only shields the lowest health ally, which a lot of people know he does, he also will share his armor and magic resist with them, a portion of it, of course. So his Fated bonus gives him armor and MR, Behemoth gives him armor and MR. Maybe you want to give him some armor and MR because you want him to share it with whoever he's shielding. So keep that in mind. It's good to get his traits in, and him sharing with another frontliner who maybe has a lot of health, like a bruiser, is quite a big deal. It makes him quite tanky. Yone cuts healing, right? He has wound. Also, Yone targets the furthest enemy within 3 hexes. A lot of people, for whatever reason, I've actually seen a lot of people assume that Yone just always goes to the furthest enemy possible. So if you notice a Yone is like on this line, it's not a bad idea to put your primary carry here, because he'll probably attack somewhere here. But the thing is, as we see here, every time he casts, his range increases by 1. So he will eventually get to your primary carry no matter what. Maybe you might even want to do something like this. So the first time he attacks Kale, hopefully, and then the next time he attacks like Sivir. There's probably some positioning tricks where you can completely make your primary carry dodge him, because he's going to go for the furthest possible. And the first time within 3 it might be here, or the next time it might be here. I don't know. But just keep it in mind that you can dodge him. At the very least, you should at least go as far away as possible. So he's not the first, your Teemo is not getting targeted right away. It might take 2 or 3 casts. So Zoe's ability, it'll ricochet to another target. Every time she kills something, it'll ricochet an additional time until the end of combat. If you watched this video equivalent of the last set, I recommended something similar to Misfortune. Whereas like, let's say you're playing Zoe and you have another Arcanist, like a Syndra. I mean, maybe Syndra's doing too much damage, but whatever. You usually want to make sure they're hitting the same target, because you really want Zoe to get these kills, right? So Yone's not a tank, but let's pretend he was. If Zoe's hitting this Yone with her ult and Yone doesn't die to it because Syndra's somewhere here hitting some random thing, or even if they're like here together and Zoe's targeting this, Syndra's targeting this, right? That's just way worse than if you have them targeting the same unit. The chance that Zoe's hitting a low health unit is much higher, and you start building up those ricochets faster. It'll actually turn fights quite a bit often if you notice that like your Zoe's not popping off. Try to make sure she's actually killing units quickly, because it matters. Let's say Aatrox is holding these 3 items and you're scouting, you're probably fighting this guy. Maybe you have the Ashe encounter where she literally tells you you're fighting. Put your Zoe here instead. So she kills Jax and starts getting these additional ricochets. If she's stuck here all fight, she's never going to kill anything. She's gonna take her so many casts just to kill this Aatrox, and her ricochets won't be building up. Okay, so Annie heals when she damages a burning enemy, right? So if you have Sunfire or Morello, that's nice. There's some of the champions we talked about who burn, like Cho'Gath. Now, she burns her, like on her second cast, she will apply a burn. So she inherently synergizes with her own ability. That being said, it's her second cast and she's a 140 health mana champion, so that might take a while. So this is kind of what I was talking about with the Sunder, with Alon and Aphelios. Yeah, you probably don't want to build a Morello or Sunfire cape if you have an Annie, but if you have one, it's not a terrible idea to just give it to her anyway. Like, let's say you slammed it early for Tempo, because she's going to start getting this passive heal right away instead of, you know, 15 seconds into a fight when her second cast came off. Keep that in mind. Or, you know, maybe you're just playing Annie with a champion who already burns in their kit, like we talked about earlier. Try to make sure Annie's targeting the same unit that they're burning, because healing every time she damages a burning enemy, does add up, right? If it's coming right away, it happens 10 times, let's say, that's 770 health that your Annie just healed if it's 2-starred, which is a lot. Morgana slows attack speed by 10% with her spell, which is great. You know, if she hits like an Ashe, again, Ashe isn't really meta right now, but that actually cuts their damage quite a bit, especially if they're Gwynsu's user, because you're slowing how fast they stack their Gwynsu's. The problem with that is that Morgana's spell targets randomly, so you can't even position to make use of this, and sometimes you might just not hit the unit you care about, which is XD, man. Syndra's is obvious, I'm sure you know. Every time she casts, she gains 1 additional orb or butterfly, which makes her next cast do, you know, 40, 60, 180 more damage. So the later the fight goes, the better Syndra becomes, pretty much. If you have her blue buff or Shojin, which you always should, probably blue buff. This also makes her an overtime demon, because she'll just cast so many times. So if you are playing around Syndra as your primary carry, make sure you are focusing on giving her mana and giving your frontline the beefiness, because you want the fights to go longer. Okay, let's get into the 5 cost. Wukong, there's not like much here. I'm just sure like a lot of people just buy Wukong because he's a 5 cost. They don't actually know what he's doing. It doesn't really matter that much because he's just like, I feel like this is just a confusing ability for the sake of being confusing. He has 3 different abilities and he'll go to the next one every time he casts. First one is just kind of a stun, which is nice on a single target, does a lot of damage. Second one, he spins around him doing AoE, so you might want to position him to hit as many targets as possible. And the third one, he will dash to the most enemies he can, which is nice because if you get to the second one, again, after, he'll spin around them as well. So yeah, just keep that in mind. I don't know. Okay, so Xayah, pretty dog shit champion at the moment. I mean, I think she's a little underrated. She's not the best, but she's not like actually useless, but people talk about her as if she is. But keep in mind that Rakan still has an effect if you use Xayah, and he heals your 3 lowest health allies, but this is also affected by trick shot. So if you have 2 or 4 trick shot, Rakan is actually healing a lot of your team, even though you're playing Xayah for the damage, which is actually quite nice. Again, right now it probably doesn't matter because Xayah is not really meta, and Rakan right here is broken. But you know, maybe he gets nerfed in the past. But the thing with Rakan, if you're using or fighting against him, you should really know this, is that he targets the largest group of enemies, and his ability matters so much for hitting the large group of enemies, right? So if you're playing as him, it doesn't really matter. You just hope he hits a lot of enemies. If you're playing against the Rakan, and you will because it's a very popular 5 cost, try to spread out. Especially do not clump your primary champion, right? So like, let's say you're playing like you have Lysandra in or something, like, I don't know. You have some weird stuff like this. If you really don't want Rakan coming here and hitting all these champions, because 1, the more units he hits, the biggest shield he gets, so he just becomes like this unkillable machine, and 2, he actually reduces the damage people do. So you really don't want, you have a 3-star Zoe, you don't want this to happen. You want Rakan to go somewhere here and never stop Zoe's damage, because it'll just slow down your fight so much, and it makes a big difference. Also similar to Xayah, even though you're playing Rakan, Xayah on the sideline will do a little bit of damage, which is nice. And this kind of it kind of goes back to what I was saying, that you don't want to clump too much, because Xayah is hitting the enemies that Rakan has hit, and Rakan is targeting the biggest clump. So he's going to get a huge shield, he's going to reduce your damage, and he's going to do quite a bit of damage himself because his ability does okay damage, and then Xayah will also hit those units. Okay, Aelia. So Aelia automatically sunders enemies, which is reduce their armor. Unlike Aphelios, this is 30%, so you actually have no need for like Last Whisper or whatever. I don't know if people don't know this, or they're just maybe they're playing around Ashe and they find Aelia, they're like, okay, I'll switch my items to Aelia, because they do use kind of similar items besides Last Whisper. But I have seen a lot of Last Whispers on Aurelia's. Not a lot, but more often than you probably should. And I get it, right? Sometimes you're slamming Last Whisper early, and then you find a 5 cost way later. So an item is still an item. Yeah, just keep in mind that you don't actually need it if you're going to play around Aelia. That being said, you know, you might still slam it earlier. The other thing is that her active, when she actually, the way her spell works is just kind of, her blades will like go through units, but when she activates her actual ult, she targets the lowest health, 3 lowest health enemies for a lot more damage. So she synergizes very well with other champs who do backline access, right? So maybe Rakan, he's hitting their backline if they're clumped. She will then hit the 3 lowest health units. So if those are backliners, you could just end a fight like so quickly. Also, the way her spell works is that she converts attack speed into the blades moving faster, which is actually quite nice, and she just gets 70% AD, which is also very nice. So things like Gwynsu's are nice on her, because when the blades are moving way faster, she's just doing way more damage overall. A lot of people don't exactly know how it works, besides the fact that she looks very cool. Okay, so Lysandra is a single target nuke. She'll hit the whatever she's targeting, and she stuns them for 3 seconds, which is extremely long. So if you can hit a priority target, that's very nice. But if you kill the thing that is stunned for that 3 seconds, you actually have a 50% chance to get a loot orb, which is nice. If you don't kill it, Lysandra will throw it at the largest group of enemies, which is also very nice. And if you're playing against Lysandra, again, don't clump your main carry, because you're going to get random teapots thrown at them. It's also worth noting that if Lysandra is hitting a single enemy, there's like, so let's say you get to a point where your Lysandra is against enemy Wukong, and these are the only units left. I mean, you could even have another one, doesn't matter. But as long as it's only his Wukong, even if it's a fully stacked Titans, even if this Wukong has a fully stacked Titans, Warmogs, full health, Bloodthirster, if Lysandra ults it, it will die. Other units like Teemo in the past have done this too, where it's an automatic like game closer in a one-on-one situation. It doesn't have to be one-on-one, they just have to have a single enemy on the enemy team. And that's it. There are a few other units with some like very basic things, but I think those are way more obvious just by looking at them. I try to talk about things that aren't very obvious unless you're going in and reading it. which I know a lot of people don't like to do, and people like myself just like to listen to random YouTube or podcasts while they drive and get their information that way. So I hope you learned something. If you did, I'd appreciate a like, comment, and subscription. If there's anything else you'd like to know about this set, leave it down in the comments below. I'd love to make more videos. Stay beautiful, my friends. Happy climbing.